whispered his plan, and I knew I had to flee. I didn't scream when I woke up. I made no sound at all. The last thing I remembered was the jarring squeal of tires and a stranger's hand over my mouth. Now my throat was as rough as sandpaper, and my mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on metal foil. I just listened. Through the total darkness, his voice cut through the silence and whatever drug they gave me like a scalpel. "Tomorrow we dump the body where the river bends," he whispered. Those words weren't just sound, they felt like a physical blow to my chest. Every single hair on my body stood up as if electrified. A cold dread, like ice water flooding my veins, went straight to my bones, because I knew exactly which body he was talking about. It was mine. And just like that, my life wasn't my own anymore. It was a game board where I was a pawn in the most dangerous match imaginable. The tape on my wrists had to be industrial grade, thick and strong. It felt like it had teeth, biting into my skin every time I moved. I started grinding it against the sharp edge of the metal bed frame, a slow, agonizing process like trying to saw through a branch with a fingernail. All the while, he just kept talking. His voice was a low rumble, punctuated by an occasional metallic clink in the dark. My mind was like a safecracker, listening for the faint click of a tumbler falling into place. That tiny gap in his attention to get a thumb free without him hearing the crackle of the tape. In the dead silence, every tiny sound I made felt like a thunderclap. He was pacing. I could hear his heavy boots on the concrete floor. The air was thick and smelled like a damp, forgotten basement. With no windows, it felt like being buried alive. Then I realized he was on speakerphone, and his voice became clearer. "The girl's done for, just need the shovel." Every word was a verbal punch, but I stored them away like ammunition. Each detail was a piece of a puzzle I had to solve before my time ran out. If this guy wanted a dead body for his final move, I was going to give him the greatest disappearing act he'd ever seen. My body would be gone, but not how he planned. It would be gone because I was gone. He finally hung up, and the click of the phone was as loud and sharp as a starter pistol in the silence. Then, a massive shadow crouched right beside me. The smell was overpowering, stale motor oil and rotting fast food, a toxic perfume that clung to the air. I can still smell it today, a phantom scent that hits me at random times. His breath was on my face when he whispered, "You awake enough to understand?" My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I prayed he couldn't feel the frantic rhythm against his hand. He actually chuckled. Good, saves the gag. And then he told me everything. He laid out the entire, insane plan step by step, as casually as if he were reading a grocery list. A midnight drive. Lime, and in a sickening flash, my brain understood that was to make a body decompose faster. The river, the current. He even said with a creepy pride in his voice that he'd already done this twice. Twice, the word echoed in my head. Then he said the craziest thing of all. He said I was just practice. Practice. For him, I was a rehearsal. For me, this was my one life. My one chance to graduate college, to see my sister get married, to feel the sun on my face again. But I kept my eyes shut and my breathing even. Practice? That one word was like a match thrown on gasoline. It wasn't an insult, it was information. Practice implies you can make mistakes, and I was going to use his mistakes to win. In that moment, I started writing a new script in my head, my own plan. It was the only thing that kept the terror from swallowing me whole. About an hour later, he started snoring. It wasn't a normal snore. It was a loud, rumbling sound that filled the room like a broken-down engine. It was my starting gun. Every movement was deliberate, like I was a bomb disposal expert trying to disarm a device where the slightest mistake meant detonation. Slowly, so slowly, I worked the last piece of tape off my wrist. My skin was raw and burning, but the feeling of being free was like taking my first breath after being held underwater. My feet were still bound, but I managed to slide them off the bed. They made a soft thud that was completely masked by his next rumbling snore. I knew the door was padlocked from the outside. I'd heard the heavy click, but there was a window. I'd seen its faint outline before he'd killed the lights. It was painted shut, but not nailed. This was my one shot. I grabbed a broken piece of the bed frame and used it like a crowbar. Every creak of the wood was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I held my breath each time his snoring paused, waiting for him to stir. But he didn't move. Finally, with a quiet pop, the glass came free in one piece. It didn't shatter, it was a pure miracle. I caught it just before it could fall, my muscles screaming in protest. Then came the impossible part, squeezing through an opening roughly the size of a cereal box. It was brutal. I pushed and twisted, the jagged frame scraping my skin. The pain was a hot wire searing my flesh, but it was also a glorious reminder that I was still alive. The second my feet hit the wet ground outside, a huge wave of relief washed over me, followed by a jolt of adrenaline that felt like a lightning strike. The air smelled of hay and diesel, 1,000 times better than that tomb. A single security light over a barn cast long, monstrous shadows across the yard, turning simple objects into crouching beasts. I stayed low, wearing the darkness like a cloak. I saw 3 vehicles, his old pickup, a rusty sedan, and a 4-wheeler. I frantically checked for keys, but of course there were none. He wasn't that sloppy. Time for plan B. The rusty car looked like it hadn't moved in years. I shuffled over, my muscles burning. I popped the hood, and the sound it made was like a crack of thunder. My dad's voice echoed in my head from a greasy Saturday afternoon years ago. "Just got across the streams, kiddo." He was talking about our beat-up lawnmower, but I prayed the logic held. I had a hairpin I'd somehow kept tucked behind my ear. Trying to guide that pin to the starter wire was like threading a needle in an earthquake. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped it twice. On the third try, a tiny blue spark jumped from the wire, a single firefly of hope. The engine coughed, one loud, explosive noise that tore through the night. Then, the worst possible sound, a click. A light switched on inside the house, like a single, angry eye opening. Without thinking, I dove into the backseat of the car and pulled the door shut, praying he hadn't heard the quiet click of the latch. He exploded out onto the porch, silhouetted by the light. In his hands, he held a shotgun. It was a terrifying black shape against the doorway, a jagged hole in the world. I ducked as low as I could, trying to will myself to shrink into the seat. I could hear his footsteps crunching on the gravel, getting faster. He was running. Come on," I whispered to the engine, begging it to start. It sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Boom, he fired the shotgun. The blast was so loud it felt like a physical wave hitting the car. The back window shattered, raining glass down on me. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my bare foot on the gas. The pain was sharp, like stepping on a bed of nails, but I pushed it into a small box in the back of my mind. The car shot forward, spitting gravel. Branches slapped against the windshield. I glanced in what was left of the rearview mirror and saw him sprinting for his pickup truck, his face a mask of fury. This was a deadly game of chess where he knew the board and I didn't. He knew every road, every curve. But I had one advantage. He needed me alive for his sick plan. I just needed to become a disappearing speck in his mirror. My only goal was to get away. I pushed the accelerator down harder, making the old engine scream as I pushed it past its limits and myself past my fear. After a few miles, the road split. A broken sign pointed left to town and right to nowhere. My gut screamed at me to go right, the last place he would expect. It was a gamble, like going all in on a single, unseen card, but my instincts were screaming it was the only way to win. I yanked the wheel, killed the headlights, and drove straight off the road into a massive cornfield. The car bucked like a wild animal, and then, with one final shudder, the engine died. Complete, terrifying silence descended. I didn't waste a second. I jumped out and ran. The corn stalks were like razors, slashing at my legs and face, but I kept pushing. Behind me, his truck engine grew louder. He swept his high beams across the field like giant prison spotlights, hunting me. I could hear his tires crunching over the corn, getting closer. Panic was a rising tide threatening to drown me, but then I saw it, a dark line in the field, an irrigation ditch. I dove straight into the muddy, freezing water. The shock was like being stabbed by 1,000 icy needles, but I pushed through the muck until I found it, a concrete drainage pipe. I squeezed myself under its edge, into the suffocating dark. It was like reversing my own birth, forcing myself back into a dark, cold space. His truck stopped right above me. It felt like hiding under the floorboards while a giant paced the room. I could feel the deep vibration from the engine, the growl of the predator right on top of me. Then, finally, I heard him driving away. He was gone. I waited there, shivering, until the only thing I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I had won. The cold finally forced me out of the water. My joints felt rusted shut, but I followed the ditch until it met a gravel road. My feet were raw, but the image of a safe, warm house was a lighthouse guiding me. I saw a farmhouse with lights on. It was 3 a.m., but tractor headlights were on in the yard. Someone was awake. I limped up the driveway with my hands in the air to show I wasn't a threat. A large, kind-looking farmer came out. He took one look at me, my clothes torn, covered in mud and blood with remnants of tape on my wrists, and didn't ask a single question. He just picked up his phone and dialed 911. His simple act of kindness was almost as overwhelming as the escape. It was like finally reaching the surface after being held underwater for an eternity. While we waited, he draped a thick quilt over my shoulders. It smelled like wood smoke and safety, and it became my shield. I just clutched it, unable to stop saying thank you. It was the first time I had felt warm in what felt like a lifetime. The sheriff arrived, then the paramedics. And in the warmth of that farmer's kitchen, I told them everything. The whispered plan, the river, the lime, the mention of 2 other girls. Every single horrific detail. 2 hours later, they found him. His truck was stuck in the mud in that same cornfield, screaming my name into the darkness. Game over. The court case was the next mountain to climb. It took 14 long months. Every day, I had to sit just 12 feet away from him. He never blinked. He would just stare and offer this creepy little smile, as if we shared a secret. He saw me as an object, a thing for his sick game. He didn't see the person with a life, with a family, with a future he tried to erase. He was a puppeteer trying to make me dance from the witness stand, but I had already cut my own strings. Every time they played my 911 call, I would clutch my hands and think about that warm quilt. It was my anchor in that storm, a shield against his empty stare. When I got on the witness stand, my voice was stronger than I ever thought possible. I told them everything. The jury only needed 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Life in prison plus 40 years. It was the final buzzer in a game I had been forced to play. The judge asked if I had anything to say to him. I stood up, and for the first time, my knees felt steady. I looked him directly in the eye and said the last thing he had ever said to me, "Practice makes perfect." Then I walked out of that courtroom and never looked back. I had won. If you're still here, if you watched this whole crazy story, thank you. No one should ever have to go through something this insane. We're building a community of survivors here, and the strength we get from each other is what gets us through the toughest days. Every story shared is like lighting a candle in a dark room. It doesn't just light your path, it helps someone else see their way forward too. Drop a comment if you've ever turned your worst nightmare into a victory. Someone scrolling right now might need to see that. And if you want more stories about people who refuse to let fear win, smash that subscribe button. You are not alone in the dark. Tonight, my window is wide open. The night air feels amazing. The crickets are loud, but they're just crickets, not whispers of evil plans. They're the background music to a peaceful night. And I'm just me, alive, breathing, and free. That river is a few miles from my house. I drive by it on my way to class sometimes. It's like a scar on the landscape. Some days it's a wound that has healed. Other days it's a dark reminder. But either way, it doesn't own me. This story isn't a weight I carry. It's the armor I forged. I decide what it means. And for me, my story is just beginning.